Today's Old Testament reading is Genesis chapter 45, beginning with the first verse. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, I pray you." And they came near. And he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to the Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land in Egypt. Make haste and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. And there I will provide for you. For there are yet 5 years of famine to come, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty. And now your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father of all my splendor in Egypt, and of all that you have seen. Make haste, bring my father down here." Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. And after that, his brothers talked with him. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Joseph could no longer control himself. It's hard to think of any more poignant, moving moment in all of literature, of all the world, than this moment when Joseph has the encounter with his brothers. I mean, the history is absolutely harrowing. When they were much younger, Joseph was the favorite of their father Jacob. What a dysfunctional family. And the brothers, devoured by jealousy, sell him into slavery down into Egypt. They take his coat, they bloody it, they show it to their father and say, "Here is what has become of your favorite son." Cruel. Father's heart is shattered. Many years have passed. There's a famine and the brothers have to go down to Egypt. They assume Joseph is long gone. But it turns out that against all odds, Joseph is the one in Egypt who is in charge of the food supply. And so they come before him and they ask for food. They do not recognize him, understandably. He sends his Egyptian entourage out of the room, and then he just begins weeping so loudly that they hear it in the next room. He hasn't said anything yet. The brothers have to be wondering, why is this man crying like this? Then he speaks to them in Hebrew for the first time, and he says, "I am your brother Joseph." I mean, imagine the feeling. His first question is my father alive? He'd wondered so long, had doubted it for so long. The brothers are thunderstruck. They are numb. They cannot even answer. So Joseph comes closer to them and says again, "I am your brother Joseph." And they're expecting something like torture or death penalty. But instead, what Joseph says is, Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves. I mean, so often in life, we have some one-off. There's that one bad day when you make the one really dumb mistake and you wish we could rewind and do it all over again, but you can't. And you feel distressed and angry with yourself just forever because of that one bad moment. Joseph says, do not be distressed or angry with yourselves. And then the most amazing thing that's stunning, we can't even parse it. He says, it was not you who sent me here, but God. Well, they'd sent him there clearly. But what he says is, you didn't do this. God did this. He doesn't give them a second chance. Say, get your act together and do better. He doesn't blame them. He doesn't even forgive them. Oh, I forgive you. Instead, what he does is he looks at what they did that was so very wrong, and he says, God has brought good out of what was evil for you. I mean, this is the gospel. This is God's grace. It's not God giving us a second chance or even forgiving us, but that God can actually use our foibles, our weakness, our mistakes, even the darkest part of ourselves, to bring good out of it. God does not cause evil. God doesn't cause car accidents. God doesn't sow cancer cells in people. Let us not say it is God's will when someone is sick and die. God does not take Cupid's arrow and cause someone to have an extramarital affair. No. There are bad things that happen. God does not cause any of them, but God can bring good out of the evil, and that is our hope. The prayer that I have prayed every day of my life as a parent has been this, that Lord, help me to be the best father that I possibly can be, but I know I'm making a lot of mistakes, so please, Lord, use my mistakes to the advantage of my children. My children love this prayer, by the way, because they always respond by saying, yeah, you made a lot of mistakes. It's great. What really interests me about this passage today, though, is all this weeping and kissing and embracing that's going on. It's not over even after this. Because what happens is they send messengers down to Jacob back home with the news that Joseph, your son, is alive. And Jacob, he never thought he would hear such words. He gave up on his son so many years before. He weeps for joy. He gets in a caravan plodding across the desert. Joseph comes out from Egypt in a chariot. They meet one another. They fall on each other's shoulders and they weep out loud. But even that weeping is repeated not long after, because Jacob is very old at this point and he dies shortly thereafter. What it says is those brothers once again fall on each other's shoulders and weep for joy. All this weeping and embracing. I don't know what happens to us. A lot of times I'm conducting a wedding. It's always interesting. Sometimes the couple gets choked up or the parents get choked up. But sometimes I look way in the back and there's somebody back there. They hardly know the people. They get choked up. They have a tear. They're crying. I think, you're not the one getting married. We cry the story of a total stranger. We pay good money to go to a movie knowing that we're going to, because people told you it's a tearjerker. Well, we'll pay money. And we'll go, why is this? I think what the Bible wants to teach us is that you and I are made for tears and strong embraces. We are not made to be in control. Now, society tells you to be in control. You got to be in control. You got to be in control of your own existence. Don't lose control. That's the worst thing that could happen. But life is not about being in control. The real healing and good comes when we're out of control. Society gives us other messages. I love the movie A League of Their Own. It's during World War II, and the women were playing the baseball, and Tom Hanks plays Coach Jimmy Dugan. And one of his players, Evelyn, has committed a terrible error out in the field. So when the inning's over, she comes over, and he comes and he chews her out, telling her how expensive that mistake was. And she begins crying, and he says, "There's no crying in baseball." It's hilarious in the movie when this happens. And we get this message like, there's no crying in life. Oh, we'll allow ourselves a few maudlin tears now and then. If I narrated to you what some of you are about to do this next week, which is to take a child off to college, if I tell you the first time how that went, actually the second and third times how that went, for me, I took my daughter Sarah to that mecca of all institutions, Duke University. And if I tell you that after we left her, I sobbed, I couldn't control myself, you'd think, oh, what a sweet dad. But if I told you I still was shedding tears 2 months later, you'd say, man up, get yourself under control. Then I did it 2 years later with my next child, and then 5 years later with my next child at that other institution, the University of North Carolina. We allow ourselves a few tears, but on the whole, there's no crying in life. It's a rule, and yet we miss out, don't we? Because there's some cleansing. There's some tapping into the deepest part of ourselves. It's a baptismal wonder of some kind, and so it's why we pay good money to shed tears. The movie Steel Magnolias, when it first came out, somebody said, oh, it's a chick flick, it's not for guys. Well, I'm going to be an honorary chick and tell you it's one of my favorite movies. And I love the moment Sally Field plays the mother of Shelby, who dies as a young mother herself. And they're at the graveside, and they're barely holding back their tears, and then some religious woman that she knows tries to tell her, you should be happy because she's with Jesus, and Sally Field just loses it and just sobs uncontrollably out loud. I defy you to watch that and not shed a tear yourself. Or maybe in Forrest Gump, where Forrest comes to Jenny's grave and tells her how wonderfully little Forrest is doing. Or we probably needed this all through human history. I mean, go back to the ancient Greeks, Homer. If you read the Iliad, you have the story of Andromache when she learns of the death of her beloved husband Hector. And it's told with such power you can't read it without shedding a tear. She says, my knees were like ice. I was like a mad woman running through a dark hallway. She describes her uncontrollable sobbing. There's something in us that wants to cry, that needs to cry. Although the world says there's no crying in life, there's some underground well, and it is a well of life, but it is untapped because there's no crying in baseball. Tears tell us everything we need to know about life and what matters, doesn't it? The first significant tears I can remember came from when my grandfather died. We got in a call in the middle of the night, and we were told, you have to come to Oakboro now, not later, now. And so we piled in the car, and we drove through the night. And we arrived in Oakboro over there in Stanley County just as the sun was coming up, and we pulled up at my grandparents' house. I saw my father get out of the car and meet his brothers under the old oak tree there, and I don't know what they said, but they fell on each other's shoulders and they wept out loud. And this was in the 60s when men didn't cry. These were military men, strong men of the earth. We saw them cry out loud, and that said that life is precious and love runs really deep. There's actually a strange beauty in sorrow, isn't there? There's a healing in tears. We've been thinking all this week about Robin Williams and his awful death. And I realize how much Robin Williams has meant to me, various scenes in various movies that have helped me understand my life, that have helped me to have hope. Perhaps none more important than in the movie called Good Will Hunting. Robin Williams plays a therapist named Sean McGuire, and he tries to counsel this guy named Will Hunting. Will, he was abused as a child, and he became this rough, crusty young man. He's brilliant, but he's always in fist fights. He's just in constant trouble. So he keeps going to Sean for counseling, and then one day Sean has a folder that details all of the physical abuse that Will had suffered when he was a boy. And he looks at Will and he says, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. And Will resists this for a moment, but finally he says, it's not your fault. And Will just dissolves into tears on Sean's shoulder, just sobbing. And that's when the healing began. It's when the healing began. I visited a woman in the hospital a number of years ago, and she was near the end of life, and she was talking about it, and she began to cry. And she was somebody I was very close to, so I bent down to try to comfort her, and when I did, my face touched her face, so here her tears blotted onto my cheek. So that when I rose up, she saw the tears on my cheek, and she grabbed her tissue, and she said, oh, don't cry, it'll be all right. And I love that. My tears were her tears before they were my tears. Our tears are God's tears before they are our tears. Whatever our sorrows, God feels those sorrows first, and if anything, more deeply than we do. When we are very close to the heart of God, there is inevitably some tear shedding. There is some heartbreak. We get very near to the heart of God because God looks down at the world and we keep our diversions. We stay busy. We go and we have some fun. But God looks down and he thinks about the person who is hurting and has trouble sleeping at night. God looks down at places in our world where there is violence, Gaza or whoever. God looks down at places in our country where there is tension and strife, Ferguson, Missouri, wherever. God weeps. Jeremiah says that God has a fountain of tears. We should be glad. Think if God had no tears for us. Think if God had no sorrow over his children's suffering. You know, Jesus wept, and he wept often. He wept when he saw his friend Lazarus had died. He wept when he looked over the city of Jerusalem and saw how far it had fallen away from God's will. He wept so many times. All these stories in the Gospels, they don't even use the word tears, but they should. When it says that Jesus was moved with pity, that Greek word probably means that he shed tears. Jesus sheds tears. I wondered this week if at the Last Supper Jesus shed tears. That night had to be for him like the moment that Joseph was with his brothers. Joseph was with brothers who had betrayed him. Jesus sat down to dinner with people who had betrayed him, who denied him, who would run for the exits at the first opportunity. And yet Jesus loved them. And I wonder, Jesus knew the Psalms so well. Psalm 42 says, "My tears have been my bread." Did Jesus, when he broke that bread and saw in that broken bread an image of what would happen to his body on the cross the next day, did he shed a tear? When Jesus took that cup and he looked into the cup and saw an image of his blood that would be shed the next day, did he shed a tear? Jesus knew the Psalm 102, "My tears are mingled in my wine." I'm tempted to think of the Hank Williams song, "There's a tear in my beer." That's silly. But were there tears in Jesus' cup? I would think so. I would hope so. They are tears that come from the underground well of God himself. And they are tears that ultimately are about healing, that are about joy, that are about reunion. I love the moment at the end of the third Lord of the Rings movie, The Return of the King, where Frodo and Gandalf and his friends, they thought they would never see each other again. They thought they wouldn't survive, but somehow they did survive, and they were reunited, and one by one, they come in that room, and they're laughing or they're crying, and they're embracing it. And it is said that when J.R.R. Tolkien wrote those words, that as he wrote, his own tears splattered onto the page and blotted the ink, and he had to rewrite it. Tears of joy. Sometimes we use the term laugh till you cried. I tried all this week to think of something I could say that would make you laugh until you cried. I just couldn't come up with it. Everything I thought of that made me laugh until I cried, like it wouldn't be that funny to you. It's always personal. It's the one I thought of it was a hopelessly long denominational meeting. It was awful. And the planners planned so poorly, and it was running really late at night, and they're having this big extravagant program about the Church of Tomorrow, the Church of Tomorrow, and we got these snarky tweets going along, laughing just to cope with it. I hate to tell you, we do that at church meetings. And finally, I noticed that it was 12:01. It had passed midnight, so I tweeted, "It is tomorrow." I could see my Twitter friends just and we couldn't get it under control, could we? We just kept laughing out loud. People were punching us, "Stop." You laugh till you cry. You cry till you laugh. God made us for tears and for embracing. God created that deep well within us. Go there. Let it flow. It's the way to healing. It's the way to life. How good of God to make us this way. Thanks be to God. pronounce the benediction, let me say with some sadness and yet gratitude and anticipation that this is Patrick Scott's last Sunday with us. He has graced us in so many wonderful ways. He is a fantastic organist, and he is a better person and a better friend. Patrick, we are grateful for you. We love you. We send you with our blessings and promise to pray for you, and our friendship will extend across all of these years. God bless you, my friend. And now may the grace of our risen Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with each one of us, both now and forevermore.